I stood frozen at the bank teller's window, staring at the computer screen like it was lying to me. The numbers didn't make sense. Our joint inheritance account showed a balance of $0.00. Just emptiness staring back at me. "Are you sure?" I whispered, though I already knew she was right. The teller looked uncomfortable, sliding a printed statement across the counter. I watched her fingers point to the transaction from yesterday. A single withdrawal. The entire amount. Gone. My hands started shaking. This couldn't be real. Dad had just been gone for 3 weeks. 3 weeks, and somehow his memory was already turning into ash. I grabbed the statement and walked outside into the bright morning sun that suddenly felt too harsh. That's when I saw him. Dylan pulled up in a brand new SUV, the kind we could never afford before. He stepped out wearing designer sunglasses and a leather jacket. When he saw me, he didn't look guilty or sorry. He smiled. That smirk made my stomach drop even further. I walked toward him, holding the statement like a weapon. "What did you do?" My voice came out small and broken. He laughed. Actually, I laughed. "It's mine now," he said casually, leaning against his new car. "And it could have been yours too, if you had any sense. But you never had my vision, Mara." My father's voice echoed in my head from the hospital, just days before he died. "Don't ever let greed win, Mara. Promise me." I had promised him. But Dylan had just made a different choice entirely. 3 weeks earlier, we'd sat in the lawyer's office for Dad's will reading. The room was cold and sterile, full of leather chairs and heavy wood. Mom sat next to me, tissues clutched in her hand. Dylan sat across from us, his face unreadable. The lawyer read the words slowly and carefully. Our father had decided to split everything equally between us. The house, the savings, the investments, all divided right down the middle. But there was one important condition attached to the money. Neither of us could touch our shares until we both agreed on how to use it. It was Dad's way of making sure we stayed connected, I think. Dylan leaned forward when the lawyer said that part. "What if one of us wants to access our share early?" he asked smoothly. The lawyer explained that we would need to sign joint authorization forms, which meant both of us had to agree. It was protection, really. Dad's way of keeping us honest with each other. He always worried that money could tear families apart. After the meeting, Dylan put his arm around me in a way that felt fake. "Don't worry, sis," he said, his voice all sugar and warmth. "You can trust me completely. We're family. We'll get through this together." At that moment, I actually believed him. I had no idea he was already planning to cut me out. I didn't know that his promises were just words designed to make me lower my guard. I was too broken to see clearly. Grief makes you trust people you should question. Looking back now, I realize that was the moment everything started to fall apart. After Dylan's betrayal at the bank, I went straight to Mom. I thought she would be my backup, my support, my parent. I was so naive. I burst through her front door, still holding that bank statement, my voice shaking as I explained what had happened. Mom was sitting in her favorite chair, watching television. She didn't even turn it off. She just looked at me like I was being dramatic about nothing. "Honey, I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding," she said in that dismissive voice that made my chest tighten. "Dylan probably just moved the funds to a better account. You know how he is about investments." "Mom, he took all of it," I said, my voice getting louder. "He took my inheritance. Our inheritance. The money Dad left us." She waved her hand like I was overreacting. "Don't be ridiculous. Dylan would never steal from you. He's your brother. He's always been the responsible one anyway." Those words hit harder than any punch. The responsible one? Dylan had been failing at everything his whole life. He'd had 3 jobs in 2 years. He'd borrowed money from friends and never paid it back. But somehow, in Mom's mind, he was suddenly the successful one. That's when I realized something terrifying. Dylan had already convinced her. He'd filled her head with stories about me being unstable and irresponsible. Everyone had taken his side before even hearing my side. I was completely alone, and nobody believed me. Mom turned back to her television like the conversation was over. I stood there, holding that statement, realizing I'd just lost my family too. 2 days later, Dylan showed up at my apartment with a briefcase and a lawyer's smile on his face. He handed me a stack of official-looking papers without even saying hello. They were legal documents, all formatted perfectly with my name and his name in big bold letters. "Just sign these," he said casually, like he was asking me to pass the salt. "It's an agreement that gives me full control of the inheritance. In exchange, I'll give you a small settlement. $20,000. That should be enough for you to get a fresh start somewhere." $20,000. Our father had left us over $600,000 each. I felt the rage rising in my throat like a wave. "No," I said simply, sliding the papers back across the table. "Absolutely not. I'm not signing anything." Dylan's face changed. The fake smile disappeared. He leaned forward, and for the first time, I saw the real Dylan underneath all that charm. "You'll regret this," he said coldly. "I'm giving you an easy way out. Take it, or you'll wish you had." There was a threat in his voice that made my skin crawl. I stood up, pointing toward the door. "Get out of my apartment." He stood up too, shoving the papers into his briefcase with sharp, angry movements. As he walked toward the door, something fell out of his jacket pocket. It was small and silver, glinting in the afternoon light. A key. After he left, I picked it up. It was old, the kind of key people used decades ago. There was no label, no explanation, just a mystery sitting in the palm of my hand. That key was about to change everything. The key burned in my pocket for 3 days. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Where did it come from? What did it open? I finally decided to check my dad's old files, boxes he'd left in my apartment before he got sick. Inside one of the cardboard boxes, I found a leather journal filled with my father's handwriting. As I flipped through the pages, my breath caught. There were references to a storage unit downtown. And there, tucked between the pages, was a rental agreement with the storage unit number listed clearly. I drove there the next morning with the key shaking in my hands. The storage facility was old and quiet, the kind of place where people stored things they wanted to forget. I found Unit 247 and turned the key in the lock. The metal door rolled up, and my eyes adjusted to the darkness inside. What I found made me gasp. Boxes were stacked carefully, organized with labels in Dad's neat handwriting. Photo albums, personal ledgers, documents. And there, sitting on top of everything else, was an envelope sealed with my name written on it in Dad's familiar script. "For Mara, if Dylan ever betrays you." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter, handwritten, dated just 2 weeks before he died. As I read the first line, tears started streaming down my face. My father had known. Somehow, he had known what Dylan was capable of. The letter explained everything. Before Dad got sick, he'd transferred the deed to an old rental property into my name. He'd done it secretly because he was afraid of Dylan's greed. He wanted me protected. He wanted me to have something Dylan could never take away. Sitting on the concrete floor of that storage unit, surrounded by my father's love, I realized something important. Dylan thought he'd won. But he'd actually missed the best part. I read that letter over and over, until I had it memorized. My father had owned a building downtown, an old brick structure that used to be a factory. He'd bought it years ago as an investment, but then his health got worse. He'd been holding on to it quietly, waiting for the right moment to tell me about it. "Mara," the letter said in my father's careful handwriting, "if you're reading this, then Dylan has shown his true colors. Don't hate him, but don't trust him either. The building is yours now. It's in your name, and the deed is in the storage unit. Use it wisely. Build something beautiful from it. Show the world who you really are. I held that letter against my chest and whispered something I didn't know I was capable of feeling. You thought you took everything, I said to Dylan, even though he wasn't there. But you missed the best part. For the first time since the betrayal, I smiled. My heartbreak had transformed into something else. Something powerful. Something like resolve. The next day, I went to the county records office and registered the deed officially in my name. Then I drove downtown to see my inheritance with my own eyes. The building looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The brick was crumbling in places, the windows were dirty and dark, and the roof had a suspicious leak in one corner. Inside, I found tenants living in rooms that barely qualified as apartments. The walls needed paint. The floors needed replacing. Everything smelled like mold and hopelessness, but something inside me refused to give up on it. I walked through every hallway, talking to the tenants, listening to their stories. They were good people. They were just poor people. People like me now. One elderly tenant, Mrs. Chen, showed me her tiny studio apartment. Your father was a good man, she told me, sitting on her worn-out couch. He never raised the rent. Not once in 10 years. He said he believed in people having homes. As I left the building that evening, Mrs. Chen pulled me aside. By the way, she said quietly, your brother was here last week. He was asking if the building was for sale. He seemed very interested in buying it. My blood ran cold. Dylan had been looking for this building. He wanted to buy it. He didn't know it was already mine. He had no idea that what he was searching for was already sitting in my hands. Suddenly, everything made sense. Dylan's urgency to get control of the money. His aggressive push to make me sign away my inheritance rights. His anger when I refused. He wasn't just being greedy for the sake of it. He had a plan. He wanted to buy this building, probably flip it for a huge profit, and become rich quickly. But Dad had been smarter than all of us. He'd seen through Dylan's schemes from miles away. He'd protected me by putting this building in my name before Dylan even knew what he was after. For the first time, I realized I could actually win this. Not through revenge or cruelty, but through strategy. Through playing the game better than he did. Through using my intelligence and patience against his greed and impatience. I sat in my car outside the building and made a promise to myself. This time, I'm not going to be the victim. This time, I'm going to be smart. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was spinning with plans and possibilities. By morning, I had mapped out exactly what I needed to do. First, I would fix up the building. Second, I would make it beautiful and valuable. Third, I would wait for Dylan to come crawling, and then I would be ready. I spent the next month registering the deed officially, securing small business grants, and taking out a renovation loan using the building as collateral. It wasn't easy. Banks didn't exactly trust someone with no business experience and a crushed spirit. But I kept going anyway. I named the project the Phoenix Building, because that's what I was trying to become. A bird rising from ashes. I documented every step of the renovation on a simple blog, posting photos of the before and after pictures. I wasn't doing it for attention. I was doing it to remember that transformation was possible. Slowly, the building started to change. I brought in contractors and volunteers. I painted walls with soft colors that made the apartments feel less like prisons. I fixed the leaking roof. I replaced broken windows. Mrs. Chen and the other tenants started smiling again. The renovation blog started gaining attention online. People loved the story. A woman rebuilding her life through a broken building. It was a metaphor that made sense to everyone. Comments poured in from strangers telling me how inspiring my journey was. One day, I got a message on the blog from an anonymous user. "This building looks familiar. Where is it?" I recognized the writing style immediately. It was Dylan. He was watching my progress. He had no idea the building was mine, but something about it was calling to him. While I was rebuilding, Dylan was falling apart. The stolen money, it turned out, wasn't enough to keep him floating. He'd invested badly in a scheme that promised quick returns. It turned out to be a scam. His investors were suing him. His credibility was destroyed. I heard about it through mutual friends. Apparently, Dylan was borrowing money from everyone now, making promises he couldn't keep. The same pattern that had defined his whole life was just happening faster and more publicly. One evening, Dylan showed up at my apartment door, and I barely recognized him. His designer clothes were wrinkled. His hair was messy. His whole face looked defeated. Before I could say anything, he pushed his way inside, shouting accusations. "You did this to me," he yelled, his face turning red. "You somehow sabotaged my investments. You told people I was a fraud. You ruined me." I stood there calmly, crossing my arms. I didn't yell back. I didn't need to. The truth was already doing all the work. "No," I said quietly. "I didn't do anything to you. You did it to yourself. You stole from me. You lied to our mother. You made choices, and now you're facing the consequences of those choices." He stared at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was becoming one to him. He left without another word, and I locked the door behind him, wondering if he'd ever hit rock bottom, or if he'd just keep falling. A few months later, my phone rang late at night. It was Dylan. His voice was different now, broken and desperate. He was crying. "Please," he said between sobs, "I just need a little help. Just enough to get me through the next month. I'm losing everything. I'm about to lose my house. Please, Mara, you're my sister. You have to help me." I listened to him beg, and I thought about the hurt he'd caused me. I thought about the emptiness I'd felt when that account showed $0. I thought about my mother choosing him over me. But I also thought about Dad's letter, about mercy and wisdom and choosing the high road even when you could choose revenge. "I'll think about it," I told him, and then I hung up the phone. The next day, I saw his house listed on a real estate website. He'd put it up for sale, probably out of desperation. That's when I noticed something interesting. His house was right across the street from the Phoenix building. I couldn't explain why I did what came next. Maybe it was destiny. Maybe it was a pure strategy. Or maybe it was just the way the universe was arranging pieces on a board that had been knocked over. I secretly bought Dylan's house through my company's legal entity. Nobody knew it was me. The sale went through smoothly. The title went into the company name. And when Dylan finally had to leave, he had no idea that his new landlord would be the sister he'd betrayed. As I signed the final papers, sitting across from the real estate agent, I whispered something that surprised even myself. "Welcome to your new landlord, Dylan. You're about to learn what it feels like to be on the other side of the power." Dylan left his house with trash bags full of his belongings. I watched from a distance as he loaded them into a borrowed truck. His humiliation was complete. His reputation was destroyed. His home was gone. His pride was shattered. But this wasn't the end of his story yet. This was just the beginning of the real consequences. His credit score tanked because of all the unpaid debts. Banks wouldn't give him loans. Nobody would trust him. He was forced into low-income housing, which was ironic because he just tried to prevent our poor tenants from having safe homes of their own. I wasn't surprised when I saw the rental application come across my desk. It was through an online portal, so Dylan didn't know my company was on the other side of it. He was applying to rent one of the apartments in the Phoenix building. My building. The building he'd wanted to buy and flip for profit. I approved his application. Not out of kindness, but out of strategy. I wanted him exactly where I could see him. I wanted him to live in a building he'd once tried to own for selfish reasons, only to discover that the sister he'd betrayed was the actual owner. The lease was drawn up under my company's name, which he didn't bother to investigate. When he got the keys, he actually seemed relieved. He'd moved into one of the nicest apartments we had, one of the units we'd renovated carefully. He had no idea it was mine. I heard from Mrs. Chen that he'd been bragging to another tenant. Finally, some luck turned around, he'd said, talking about finding an affordable apartment in such a nice building. See? Things are already getting better for me. He had no idea what was about to happen. A month after Dylan moved in, I scheduled a routine inspection. I dressed professionally, carrying a clipboard like any other landlord would. I knocked on his door at 9 in the morning on a Tuesday. When he opened it, his face went completely white. The color drained right out of his skin like someone had pulled a plug. "Hi, tenant," I said with a smile. "I'm just doing a routine inspection. I hope you're taking good care of my property." He slammed the door in my face. I could hear him inside, moving around frantically, probably trying to process what was happening. After 5 minutes, he opened it again, his face twisted in confusion and fury. "This isn't funny," he said, his voice shaking. "What is this? Some kind of trick?" I didn't smile anymore. "No tricks," I said calmly. "Just business. Your rent is due next week, by the way. Don't make me evict you too." Dylan accused me of everything. He said I'd manipulated him into living here. He said I was playing some cruel mind game. He said it wasn't fair. He said a lot of things, actually, but nothing changed the fact that I was his landlord and he owed me rent money. I calmly explained that those were the terms of his lease. He was welcome to find another place to live if he didn't like it, but until he did, rent was due on the 1st of every month. The look on his face was indescribable. It was anger and shame and helplessness all mixed together. He'd stolen everything from me, and now I held the power. Not through revenge, but through owning something he needed. "You're destroying me," he said, and I actually heard real pain in his voice. "No," I replied quietly. "You're destroying yourself. I'm just handling the paperwork." My mother came storming into my office a week later, her face red with anger. She demanded to know how I could be so cruel to my brother. How I could humiliate him like this. How I could live with myself. I calmly slid across copies of documents. The bank records showing the joint withdrawal. The legal proof that Dylan had stolen the money. My father's letter explaining the building. Everything. My mother's face changed as she read through each document. Her anger turned into confusion, then shame. She couldn't deny the truth anymore. It was right there in black and white. "He told me he'd moved the money to protect it," she said quietly, her voice breaking. "He said you were spending it recklessly. He said he was trying to help." "He lied," I said simply. "Just like he's been lying his whole life." But then I found something that hurt even more than Dylan's betrayal. In examining the bank records more carefully, I discovered something chilling. My mother's signature was on the forms. She had signed off on the withdrawal. She had helped him steal from me. When I confronted her about it, she tried to explain. She said Dylan had asked her for help, and she thought she was protecting the money. She said she didn't realize it was theft. She said she'd made a terrible mistake. My voice cracked as I spoke. "You didn't just lose my trust, Mom. You sold it. You chose him over me. You chose to believe his lies instead of your daughter's truth." She cried. She begged for forgiveness. But forgiveness isn't something you can just give freely when someone has hurt you that deeply. It has to be earned back, slowly, through time and changed behavior. I wasn't ready to give it yet. Dylan stopped paying rent 3 months after he moved in. He said he didn't have the money. He said he'd lost his job. He said life wasn't fair. I didn't care about his excuses. I followed the legal process exactly as written. I gave him official notice. I filed for eviction. I followed every rule, never bending, never showing favoritism just because we shared the same last name. When he came to see me, begging me to let him stay, I handed him the legal paperwork personally. "Please, Mara," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I'm still your brother." "Exactly," I replied, not unkindly. "That's why I'm giving you the notice personally instead of having someone serve it to you. But business is business. Pay the rent or leave." He couldn't pay. He had nothing. So he left. The local news picked up my story. A journalist heard about the Phoenix building through the blog and came to interview me. She was fascinated by the idea of someone taking a broken building and their broken life and rebuilding both at the same time. The article came out on the front page of the local section. "Woman rebuilds her life after family betrayal. The Phoenix Project rises from ashes." There was a photo of me standing in front of the renovated building, smiling genuinely for the first time in months. Dylan saw that article. Everyone saw that article. Suddenly, my story became public. Everyone knew what he'd done. Everyone knew how I'd responded. And everyone knew he was living in poverty while his sister had built an empire from broken pieces. His ex-wife even commented on the newspaper's website, "Karma finally delivered. I've been waiting for this day." The humiliation was total. He couldn't escape it. He couldn't run from it. It was everywhere, reminding him of his own choices every single day. Nearly a year after I'd evicted him, Dylan showed up at my office. He looked different. Smaller somehow. More tired. More human. He asked if we could talk, and I listened because I thought maybe he deserved at least that much. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice steady for the first time. "I know I hurt you. I know I stole from you. I know I lied and manipulated and did terrible things. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. I see what I did." I listened carefully. His words sounded genuine, but I'd learned not to trust easily. "Apology accepted," I said finally. "But forgiveness doesn't erase the rent you owe me, or the lease agreement you broke. Those are separate things." I handed him an official letter. Not cruel, not kind, just professional. It was simply a statement of what was owed. Nothing more. Nothing less. He took it without arguing. He understood now. Apologies don't undo damage. They just acknowledge that damage exists. Walking through the completed Phoenix building felt like walking through a dream. The tenants waved at me as I passed. Mrs. Chen was organizing a community garden on the roof. Other residents were helping each other, building a real community instead of just renting individual cells. "Thank you," people kept saying to me. "Thank you for saving our homes. Thank you for believing in us." And I would smile and say something about how they were saving themselves. I was just the landlord. But really, I was thinking about my father. About how he'd believed in people when nobody else did. About how that belief had saved me when everything was falling apart. For the first time since he died, I felt at peace. The anger was gone. The desperation was gone. What remained was just purpose and clarity and the knowledge that I'd done the right thing. Then, a letter arrived from my father's lawyer. The letter trembled in my hands as I opened it. It revealed something impossible. Before my father had died, he'd made an investment. Years ago, he'd bought stock in a small technology company that none of us had ever heard of. That company had exploded. It had become massive. And apparently, his initial investment had grown into something astronomical. The technology company was going public, and my father's shares were suddenly worth over $2 million. The lawyer had been holding the information, waiting for the right moment to tell me. He thought that moment was now. I read the letter 3 times, not quite believing it was real. I was suddenly wealthy. Not just stable. Not just secure. Wealthy. Genuinely, actually wealthy. I sat in my apartment that night and whispered to my father. "Guess who just became your millionaire landlord?" I said to his memory. And somewhere in the universe, I think he was smiling. My mother invited me to the family reunion that summer. I was nervous about seeing everyone again, but I decided to go. I needed to face them all and let them see who I'd become. The party was held at a nice restaurant downtown. As I walked in, whispers filled the room. Everyone was talking about me. Everyone knew my story now. Everyone was trying to figure out how the girl they'd once pitied had become someone they had to respect. Dylan was there too, sitting in the corner, his shoulders hunched. He wouldn't make eye contact with me. My mother looked ashamed. My other relatives didn't know what to say to me anymore. I'd changed. We both knew I'd changed. At the end of the night, I raised a glass to propose a toast. The room went quiet. Everyone was listening. "Some of us inherit money," I said clearly, making sure Dylan could hear me. "Others inherit lessons." I inherited both. Dad's greatest gift wasn't the building or the investments. It was teaching me that my worth doesn't come from what other people think of me. It comes from what I do with the choices I'm given. I raised my glass higher. To inheritance. To choices. To become who we're meant to be. 6 months later, I was sitting in my office when my phone pinged with a notification. It was a payment alert. A rent payment had just arrived from one of my tenants. The name on the payment read, Dylan Rivers. He was still living in the Phoenix building. Still paying rent to his sister. Still facing the consequences of his choices every single day. I smiled softly at my phone. Not a mean smile. Not a cruel smile. Just a smile that acknowledged how the world works. How karma doesn't always come as lightning and thunder. Sometimes it comes quietly, as a monthly rent payment that's always on time. I closed the notification and looked around my office. The walls were covered with photos from the renovation. Pictures of tenants celebrating. Pictures of the building transformed. Pictures of a girl who'd been broken and learned to rebuild. Outside my window, the city sparkled with evening light. Somewhere down there, Dylan was in his apartment in my building, living a quiet life in the wreckage of his choices. Somewhere else, my mother was probably thinking about apologies she still owed me. And somewhere in the sky, my father was probably proud that his daughter had learned the most important lesson of all. That the best revenge isn't destruction. It's transformation. It's taking what was meant to destroy you and building something beautiful instead. And just like that, karma paid on time.